some of you were shuttling kids around or getting people into their right places this morning, fixing breakfast. So just wanted to be sure that I'm checking in on everyone's energy level, making sure that if we're sleep deprived, then I'm bringing the right energy level to the session to make sure this is engaging for you all, but also not too, too perky in case that's annoying for anyone. So we have about, let's see, 79 people on the call right now, and I still see people trickling in. So we'll give it maybe 2 or 3 more minutes before we get started. And yes, folks, as you're joining the call, please feel free to share your name, your role at your organization, and if you feel comfortable doing so, how many hours you slept last night, and how many hours do you typically need. I'm seeing that most of us are not coming in with the optimal hours of sleep. I feel like that's probably the case most days, even though it's Friday. So I'll be very mindful of that. Oh, Noreen, you've got your perfect amount of 8 hours. I'm so glad for you. Seeing lots of 8 hours, a lot of 6-7 range as well. Never enough sleep. Totally agree with you there, Robin. You know what sucks? Sometimes like I look forward to the weekends because I figure I can sleep in, but I live across the street from a club. I recently found that out. I had moved to this apartment during the pandemic or earlier parts of the pandemic, and earlier parts mean like clubs and stuff were shut down. And then earlier in the summer, one evening, I'm just sitting at home and like it's really loud outside, and it's like 11:30 p.m. on a Friday night. It's usually not that loud where I live. And then I find out, oh, I live across the street from a club, and they go on until about 1 or 2 a.m. So nowadays, my weekend isn't necessarily where I get my sleep recovery. So I just have to be mindful of getting to bed earlier so that I can get into the deep sleep mode before the clubbing starts. Okay, so I see that we are. I know, thanks, Robin. We are at 91 people, 94 people, lots of trickling in. I'll give it another like 30 seconds and then we can get started with today's content. Okay, so thanks everyone who was open to sharing how many hours you slept last night. For some of us, we got our optimal hours of sleep. I would say it looks like the majority of us are a little bit sleep deprived this morning. And as I was saying earlier to folks who joined earlier in the call, I am mindful of this sleep deprivation. And I'm going to try to bring the right energy level to this session to be sure that it's both engaging and informative, but not too much one way or the other, so that you don't feel either asleep or annoyed with the content that's going to come now. But why don't we go ahead and get started with the main content for today. So thank you everyone for joining our call today. As you know, this is the Active Contract Management Orientation session. And we like to call it ACM, Active Contract Management, ACM for short. So if you hear me say ACM throughout today's presentation, that's what I'm referring to, the whole Active Contract Management thing. So to get us started, let me go ahead and flip to our agenda slide. And so you'll see we've already started with our welcome. We had our warm-up questions. And in just a moment, I'm going to talk through session norms. And then we're going to do a little bit more formal introduction so you know who I am and why I'm talking to you and all that jazz. And then we'll walk through what the heck exactly is active contract management, why are we even on this orientation session, and all those things. And then we'll talk through the two primary buckets of, sorry, a bit of echo, so if you're not, thank you, if you're not speaking at the moment, please mute yourself. I really appreciate that. I don't like to tell people to mute themselves, but it's just for the sake of like smoother communications online. Sometimes it's a necessity. In any case, so we'll talk through what exactly is active contract management and the two primary buckets of active contract management, which are compliance management and performance management. And then just to kind of give you all a sense of what we're hoping to do in this coming contract cycle, we'll do an active contract management meeting simulation. We'll do, we hope to have some time to crowdsource your thoughts on some potential meeting ideas, and then we'll do a quick recap and next steps of what's to come. And before we get any further, I just wanted to quickly note that we've piloted some of this content with providers who are on this call already. So to everyone who participated in this pilot earlier this summer, thank you very much. Some of this content will be a bit of a refresher for you, and it'll be new for most of you, because with this new contract cycle, we are taking a slightly different approach to active contract management, and hopefully this session will help you feel fully informed and kind of level set expectations across the board for everyone. So that is our agenda today. I didn't build in a formal break, but I figure about halfway through the presentation or session, we can probably have a quick 5-minute breaks because it is 2 hours today. And if possible, we may even end early. But so that's what you have to look forward to today. And before we get to the introductions, let me just quickly talk through our session norms. So I just wanted to be sure to be explicit and kind of set the right tone for our session today and say that this is a judgment-free zone, this is a learning environment, this is a learning space, and we really encourage you to ask questions and share your thoughts, even if they're not quote-unquote fully formed or you're hesitant to say something, because we want to be sure that because we are moving to a new approach with active contract management or a revised approach with active contract management, things are going to look different. So you probably will have questions. And chances are, if you have a question, someone else has that question too. So feel free to just voice it. As I mentioned earlier, please mute yourself if you're not speaking. But if you are unmuting yourself to ask a question, you can turn your camera on if you feel comfortable, just so that we can see who's in the room and get to know each other a little better. Next bullet is use the chat as much as you like. I see some of you are already doing and asking questions already. And yes, we will make the slides available. And as you're using the chat, feel free to be generous with your affirmations of others' questions or thoughts or comments, and invalidating, not invalidating, but invalidating other people's questions and thoughts. So you can definitely use like the heart functions or the thumbs up function of Teams. And just in case anyone isn't quite as familiar with Teams, in order to do like the raise hands or different types of reactions, if you look up and top to the little ribbon on your Teams, there should be like different little avatars, and there should be a little character who's doing this kind of gesture. And if you click on that person, you can do different reactions. So I'll just show like, this is what, yeah, like that's a raise hand. Feel free to test it out. And like, this is the heart kind of thing. You should see it pop up. And this is a clap. So yeah, you can do all those things. And if you do raise your hand, and if you don't have an actual question, also remember to put your hand down. Otherwise, I think it's going to be like a question that you have. I'm seeing hands go up. I'm going to assume that people are just testing right now, but does anyone actually have a question? Okay. Robin, did you have a question, or were you just testing?
Okay, I'm just playing with it.
Okay, no problem. I was assuming.
Did it go down? I thought I put my hand down.
It's still up for me at least.
Let me try that.
Okay, it's down now. Great. So you know how to use it. Love that. Okay, cool. So yes, be generous with your affirmations. Feel free to use the different functions in Teams to voice your thoughts. Also be brave in voicing your concerns. As I mentioned, this is a new approach to active contract management we're taking, and we've tried to think through all the different potential implementation challenges and whatnot. But we're not able to think through everything. So if we're sharing something or sharing an idea or sharing a practice, and you're like, I'm not really sure that's going to work for our organization, or if there's some kind of complication, but feel free to let us know, because there's always time to incorporate your ideas, and we want to make this as co-designed a process as possible. And then the last norm that I just wanted to mention today is your thoughts are your own. So you're all showing up as individuals today. And I just wanted to mention this because I know that for a lot of you all, your colleagues from the same organization are on the line as well. But because we're in this virtual setting, it's hard for you to kind of convene with them and just kind of gut check any questions or thoughts that you have. So there might be some hesitancy in sharing your thoughts because you don't want to feel like you have to speak for your organization if you haven't gotten a chance to vet it. But for today's session, don't worry about that. You're all showing up as individuals, and we recognize that your thoughts are your own, and whatever you say, you don't have to feel like you are the representative of whatever organization you're working for. So those are the session norms, and the next slide is first will be just a quick introduction, I believe, of the Harvard Kennedy School, and then we'll give a chance to some of the folks on the OEC side of things to introduce themselves as well. So I still hear a little bit of feedback, so if anyone hasn't muted themselves yet, please do so that the rest of us can hear the presentation in its full audio quality, I guess. But again, just to say, by way of formal introduction, my name is Anne, and I'm a fellow with the Harvard Kennedy School's Government Performance Lab, and I'm embedded with the Office of Early Childhood, which is just to say I work very closely with the folks in the Office of Early Childhood in procurement and improving contract processes, which the OEC Internal Operations Division will also speak to in just a second. And our organization is a nationwide organization. We have over 100 projects with 72 jurisdictions across the state, and we've tried different types of active contract management in different policy areas as well. So we've done projects related to procurement, to criminal justice, child welfare, homelessness and behavioral health, workforce development, etc. And I'm really here to support the OEC as it rolls out its new form of active contract management. And on the line is also my colleague, Colin. You might have seen his video pop up every now and then. Colin, I'm not going to make you introduce yourself at this very moment, but you can all see that Colin is on the screen, and he will be playing a larger role in this orientation session later when we do some simulation activities. And so you'll get a chance to hear his voice there too. So that's the HKS and the GPL, and that's me. And I'm actually now going to turn it over to the OEC operations team to introduce themselves. And one last thing is, of course, the home visiting team is also on this call. You've heard them through many sessions already, so we're not going to do introduction to the family support division or the home visiting team, but they're also here on this call. And so now I'm going to turn it to Kathy.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kathy Lenahan, and I am the director of the Grants and Contracts Unit that sits within the Division of Internal Operations. And as you can see from the slide here, the Office of Early Childhood's Division of Internal Operations is tasked with developing and promoting the effective use of business operation systems designed to support the day-to-day functions and goals of the agencies and its employees. The other very big piece of what we do is the procurement and contracting with you folks, with community agencies and nonprofits. And so the systems that we're developing are really there not only to just support OEC and helping us reach our goals and the employees of OEC, but also to put the structure and the staff in place so that when we work with you through contracts, you feel supported. So we are led by Chris Liddy, who's the COO of the OEC. And then you can see that operations really has like 3 different parts to it. There's the grants and contracts unit, that I had mentioned I'm the director of. And then we have, in that unit, we have 4 grants and contract specialists. Irma is one that you probably will talk most with, as she supports the family support division. Also part of operations is fiscal and all of the fiscal operations that come out of there. And so there might be a time where you'll be working with fiscal. And then, there's kind of the dotted line to human resources. The human resources support for OEC also sits within both Department of Administrative Services, but also the internal operations at OEC. So that is a little snapshot of our division. And, again, we are there to support you through the contracting process and also as a support through this ACM. And I'll just walk you through some of the objectives that we have for this session. And, I want to just do a big thank you to Anne and Colin for putting this session together. They have been a key partner in helping us really put the structure of ACM into OEC. And we are happy to be launching this with you folks today. But by the end of today's session, we hope you'll be able to understand the goals and visions of OEC's revised approach to ACM. I know for many of you who have worked with OEC, who have been a contractor with us in the past, that there's always been a type of contract management and a partnership between OEC and our contractors, but this is a very prescribed approach. And you'll be able to see how it differs from prior approaches. If you're new to us, as a contractor, welcome, and that this will be your first experience with OEC and staff working through contract management. We hope that you're going to understand performance management and how it helps us understand the health of our system, what's working, what's not working, how it's going to help us identify promising practices that are happening in the field, and it's going to uplift your experience, lived experience. You are the folks who are doing this work on the ground in the communities with the families, and it's going to help us uplift what we're learning from that. And lastly, it'll help identify for OEC the topics that we should focus on and explore through data. So again, welcome this morning, and thank you to Anne, and I'll turn it back to you, Anne.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. And I see Sonia had this question that one of her colleagues is trying to get into the meeting. So I wonder if one of the program liaisons or someone from the home visiting team can support with that, because I don't quite see her in the waiting room. So there isn't a waiting room. So I think, Sonia, you probably maybe just have Irma keep trying, or maybe we can troubleshoot outside of this. She's joined. So welcome, Irma.
You're there. Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, perfect. So let me go ahead and move on to our next slide, and really start the meat of today's, or I don't want to say meat because not everyone eats meat, but really get to the heart of today's content. So what exactly is active contract management, and why are we even talking about all this, right? So when we talk about active contract management, we're really talking about 2 major buckets of activities that you see on the left and right hand of the screen in this Venn diagram. So on the left, you see things that we consider are related to compliance management. And compliance management is really about all of those activities that try to help us answer this question that you see on the bottom left of the screen, which is how efficiently are providers using OEC funds, and are they meeting contract deliverables? So that's things like tracking the life cycle of amendments or just the overall contract life cycle. That's things like your payment and budgeting processing. That's things like adhering to federal and state guidelines. So really, compliance management is really about setting a basic floor of expectations that everyone should achieve as a contractor with the OEC. And so that's one side of things. You can see there's some overlap with the right-hand side, which is performance management. But performance management, on the other hand, Yes, compliance goes both ways in the sense that like OEC also has things that it has to comply with in terms of what is expected from us at the federal level, but also in terms of like maybe not so much compliance isn't the right word, but accountability. There's accountability between both the OEC, what we should provide to providers to help set you all up for success, as well as the activities that are expected from you in order to comply with some of the requirements that are set up. So I hope that answers your question, Lisa. But on the right-hand side of this Venn diagram, you're seeing performance management. And I think performance management really tries to answer this question of how effectively are providers meeting family and community, including staff goals. And those are activities like tracking your progress on rate cards, right? Because rate cards are inherently about outcomes based and how you're moving towards the outcomes that OEC is trying to achieve. It's tracking things like changes in family outcomes. It's tracking things like systems and network engagement and things like continuous quality improvement, etc. Performance management, I think, is really
I don't know
about.
what they pulled, but they pulled something. So.
Oh, sorry, someone unmuted.
No.
I think Wendy, you might, okay, great, thank you. But performance management is really about what is the ceiling that we have now in terms of what we can achieve in our system, and how do we continue to push that ceiling higher and higher and higher so that we really are aspirational in meeting the needs of our families and communities and making sure that they are getting the resources and services that they really need to, one, close any kind of opportunity or equity gaps, and two, just live the lives that are full and rich. So that's what we think about when we think about performance management. And so I know this is still quite abstract, but I also just wanted to talk about why does active contract management matter, right? And you've kind of probably have been able to pick it up from what I was just saying now, but just to further put it into more concrete terms, I think active contract management really matters for these three reasons that you're seeing on the screen, and something that I kind of hinted at when Lisa asked the question about how does accountability or compliance go both ways. But first, active contract management matters because it keeps us focused on our North Star, or the agency's North Star, which is to strengthen the critical role of all families, providers, educators, and communities throughout a child's life. Because frankly, sometimes, you know, in the life cycle of a contract, sometimes there are things that you can get bogged down on, and just like your model requirements or things like that, or just tracking payments and stuff like that. And it can make it a little difficult to remind yourself, like, okay, why are we doing this? And like, why does this all matter? Well, active contract management sets up a structure and a process to help keep that front of mind. So that's one way that active contract management matters. The second way that active contract management matters is that it creates a transparent, continuous feedback, accountability, and improvement loop between providers and the OEC. So some of the providers on this call, if you're a returning provider, you probably remember that I think like a year and a half ago now, or even longer before that, the UConn, the University of Connecticut team, actually did a listening session or a survey with different providers. And one of the feedback that you all gave was that you're very curious about how OEC uses your data and the information that you send to OEC. Like you feel like you put things into a system, but you're not really sure how it gets used and whatnot. And so active contract management, the way we're thinking about it going forward, is partially a response to that. So let us show you what we're kind of keeping track of. And we don't want to just show you the information that we collect from you in a way that's kind of just verbatim or regurgitated, but we want to be sure that once you give us information, we're sharing it back in a value-added way. And so that's the second reason that we're trying this new approach with active contract management and why I think it matters. And then the final reason for active contract management is that we hope that the structure that we're trying to put in place will create the space for the identification and cross-pollination of promising ideas and practices between providers across the region. So as you all know from having responded to this last cycle of RFPs, OEC is really trying to do a regional approach to our home visiting service and really trying to create internal regional cohesion. And with that internal cohesion, we hope that comes statewide cohesion. But how do you create a cohesive system, right? You can't just kind of say, okay, we've had this responses and now everyone's going to work together. You have to create the structures for people to work together and share their ideas with one another. So again, that's the hope that we have with this coming version of active contract management, which will include spaces where we convene providers from a region to come and discuss both their challenges and creatively troubleshoot problems with one another in a very collaborative way. So that is why we hope active contract, or this is our kind of way of sharing what we believe is the value proposition behind active contract management. And to make things even more concrete, this is what I think active contract management will look like in practice. And so if there's anything that you take away from today's session, I hope it's this slide in particular, just so you know what the expectations going forward are, both what OEC hopes you to participate in and what you can kind of expect from us in terms of how we are trying to create the spaces for you to collaborate and work together. So as always, there will always be, formal reporting requirements, and there will always be ongoing open lines of communication between you and your liaison. So that's kind of the arrows that you see on the side of this graphic. But active contract management in particular will be kind of implemented through these 2 meetings that we're putting in place. So the first is the monthly one-on-one check-ins, which many of you have already been doing with your different program liaisons. And this meeting space is really an opportunity for you to have a one-on-one intimate conversation with your program liaison in regards to different things that are happening with your organization. It can be things related to staffing, it can be things related to spending. It can also be used as a space to verify any data, including rate card data, or preview performance management meeting agendas, or discuss the topics that you're doing in your CQI or continuous quality improvement cycles with your staff. So this is something that most of you should be familiar with it, and we want to protect it and preserve it as a time for you to really have in-depth conversations with just you and your liaison. And then the second structure that we're putting in place is something that's slightly newer. And this is going to be a regional performance management meeting, or a regional performance meeting. And we're hoping that this is going to take an every other month cadence, although of course, if we need to make adjustments, we can certainly do that. But this is going to be different from those one-on-one check-ins. In this meeting structure, we're going to bring together all the providers in one region and go deep into a specific topic, and that topic can change or evolve over time. So that topic might be things like prenatal enrollment, which was the topic of our pilot, which some of you participated in. It can be things like looking at maternal, who determines the topic. We want it to be co-determined, Lisa. So at the end of the session, we want to have some time for you to share potential topics that you're interested in. So thanks for asking that question. But yeah, so specific topics that we can do deep dives in related to things like prenatal enrollments, or like well child visits, or discrepancies that you're seeing in enrollments between different priority populations, things like that. And through these meetings, we hope to, 1, use data to inform us, like, how are we doing on the things that we care about? And 2, if we're noticing different patterns or something like that in the data, what are the insights that we can pull out of it? And what are action items that we can take coming out of these meetings as a region? And action items might be things like implementing a new practice across the board with all providers, or it could be taking some time to collaboratively explore ways to incorporate family voice. So it can be all those kinds of things. So that is what we hope active contract management will look like in practice. And again, I know this can still feel like very abstract, like what exactly is going on. So towards the end of the meeting, we're gonna show an example of what we think the meeting will look like once you actually get there. So you can kind of experience it before you actually have to go into one and jump into things. And then just the last slide for this overview section before I go into more depth about compliance management is who participates in active contract management. And really, active contract management is a collaborative process between you, and when I say you, I mean like you as the provider, so that could be many people on your staff, and your program liaison. And your program liaison is always going to be your first point of contact for all questions that you have. So anytime you have a question, anytime you have a thought, go ahead and contact your program liaisons. And I know they are, thank you. With regards to the hairdos, I'm like reading the chats at the same time and making comments on the chat. So if people aren't paying attention to the chat, I realize like sometimes it may seem like I'm jumping between topics. So I apologize for that. But so yes, your program liaison is your first point of contact for all of your questions. But I just wanted to acknowledge that there are a lot of people working behind the scenes to make active contract management work and function as well. And you may not always be in direct communication with them, but just know that they're there. So we have like our epidemiologist, Connie Hyde, who's like really working really hard to make sure that the data in ECIS is cleaned and functioning properly. We have our division director, Ashley McCullough, who is making sure that we have the vision and we're kind of holding ourselves to the vision. Irma is the grants and contract specialist, and Kathy is the division director, making sure that like we can proceed along with everything the requirements tell us of our contracts. We have our fiscal staff and our code developers. And I want to apologize because I didn't put Sandra Crew, our administrative assistant, as a little funny avatar on this slide, but Sandra is also around and she's making sure that things are functioning in the organization and in the agency to make sure that we can actually get to this point of implementing active contract management. So yes, there's a lot of people involved. And then the next slide, okay, so that was the overview of active contract management, just all the parts of it. And in the next section of our session, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into the compliance management parts of things. So before I get to that point, just wanted to do a quick check and see if there are any other questions. I know Lisa has been putting some questions here and there, but if anyone else has a question and if you feel comfortable voicing it, you can definitely share. Will ECIS data be used in determining regional level deep dive topics? I think for sure, yes, we will. We want to leverage whatever existing data we have, and no need to reinvent the wheel. So as long as we can pull data out of ECIS in a way that's analyzable, it can certainly feed into how we determine ECIS topics. We give 10 seconds to see if there are any other questions. I also just wanted to catch my breath. Okay, I'm seeing no more questions in the chat, so I'm going to move it to the next screen. And we're going to start talking a little bit more about compliance management. But before I do more talking to you, I just wanted to pop up this quick kind of poll on the screen and just ask everyone, again, answering as an individual, which compliance activity do you feel like your organization has the most challenges with? Is it keeping track of expenses and spending, supporting reports on time, data entry, or are you comfortable with all activities, or is there something else that gives you trouble? So Colin, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll right now.
Sure, 1 second.
Okay. It's going to be really cool, everyone. We finally have polling functions in Teams. Okay, so a little poll should have just popped up on your screen right now, and this is anonymous, so you feel free to answer however comfortable you are. And I just also wanted to say that we're asking this question not as like a gotcha question or entry or anything like that, but just because we want to be sure that we're hearing from you around what challenges you're having so that we can prioritize any technical assistance that we may need to give in the future. Okay, so I see people putting their responses in the chat as well. That's totally fine, and we'll collect that afterwards as well. But if it didn't pop up, there should have been a little box that pops up where you can actually submit your answer, and then we can have a live tally of responses.
Tell them the box pops up in the chat.
Yeah, the box also pops up in the chat too. Whoever just mentioned that, thank you. I'll give like another 10 seconds for people to respond. Okay, you can definitely continue responding to the poll, especially because I know this is the first time we use the poll, so maybe it was like a novel function and you're getting used to it, which is totally fine. But I'm seeing for the most part, most people feel very comfortable with all the compliance activities required of them, which is great. So that's currently at 41% of the votes. I didn't manually tally the chat votes, but I think it looks like the other kind of big challenge people have is around data entry. And so we'll just be mindful of that. And I believe Connie is going to do a session on ECIS, and maybe we'll have some tips around data entry, or just talk a little bit more about data entry, and hopefully that makes things a little smoother for folks. But yes, feel free to, oh, can't submit yours to Glesha. I'm sorry, Tanika. If you couldn't do it, definitely you can put it in the chat if you feel comfortable as well. Purchasing is difficult within a hospital system. That's a different response. So thank you, Dia, or Dea, I'm sorry if I said your name wrong, for sharing that. But yeah, folks can continue to answer the poll if they feel like, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move us to the next slide and just talk a little bit more about the different aspects of compliance management. So I know that most of you are all on a contracting orientation session where you actually walk through the different parts of the contract. And so this content is very similar. I didn't want to be too redundant so as to bore folks on the line, but I did want to just take another opportunity to pull out some particularly important aspects of your contract and compliance, just to repeat it to help you kind of internalize and remember things that we want, like that we think should be really top of mind for our different contractors. And then I'll just talk a little bit more about the importance of why we have these things as compliance requirements. So the first is the budgeting and financial reporting compliance requirement. As you can see, there's the reporting schedule on the right-hand side of the screen. Should be exactly the same as what you saw in the contract session the couple of days ago. And you can see there's also some sample report components around what you're expected to share once you do your budget and financial reporting. And so I just wanted to note that some of you have probably heard this expression that budgets are moral documents. Budgets really tell us, are the resources going where they should be going, right? Because a lot of times, I don't think this is the case for any of the providers on the line, but a lot of times there can be people who talk a big talk but don't really walk the walk, right? Like they can talk about equity, they can talk about caring for communities, but when it comes down to, are you actually giving the communities or sharing or allocating the resources in a way that is going to help people, that may not be the case. And so as kind of a formal checks and balance for us, we have this budgeting compliance requirement that helps us understand, are the activities people are engaging in, is the resourcing actually aligning to our values and vision, right? So as you can see on the screen, budgets are OEC's way of understanding resources are being directed to the families and causes that need them the most. And they're also, similar to the question that Lisa asked earlier in the chat about compliance working two ways. It's also how the federal government looks at whether OEC is complying with things. So budgets and financial reporting, that's the first element, and this is why it's important. The second major element of compliance is programmatic reporting requirements. And again, that's the reporting schedule on the right-hand side of the screen. And then for those of you who have been contractors previously, the reporting components are pretty similar, asking similar questions that we've asked in the past. And for providers who are new, you'll get a chance to see the reporting template soon enough. And why do programmatic reports matter? Well, they help us understand what's going on beneath the numbers, right? The qualitative story is often just as important as the financial spending. Because once you take kind of the programmatic report and the budget report together or financial report together, it should be mutually reinforcing. It should tell a narrative that helps us understand and gives us a comprehensive view of what's going on with service delivery and in supporting families at a given point in time when the report is due. So that's really important. Sonia, I see you have a question, so if you feel comfortable, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, what does mean IPP and the sample report components?
I think it's the individual improvement plan. It's and if a program liaison is on the line, you can correct me, but I think it's related to continuous quality improvement cycles, and it's just like a way of identifying what are the topics that are really important to you, and like how do you plan to move through those topics.
Thank you.
You did a good job, and those will be explained when you are on your calls individually with your program liaison as you start to review some of the reporting requirements, because you'll find that IPP plan is on the quarterly reporting form. And so you'll go through with your program liaison, go through that document with your program liaison and kind of identify what goals you want to work on. And then we'll just check in with you on a quarterly basis to see if that's still the area of improvement that you want to work on within your own agency with your team, and then make a plan to either hold on to that goal or shift it slightly to evaluate for the next three months. So thank you, Anne. You did it. That was it.
Thanks, and thank you, Jen, for filling in additional details. I think that was really helpful. All right, so I'm going to move us to the next slide, and the next major element of compliance that I want to pull out is benchmarks. And Connie Hai is probably going to talk more about benchmarks in her session about ECIS. And there's a lot of documentation as well on benchmarks in the home visiting manual. So I won't talk too much about it, but just to highlight why these are important and why we ask these things of you is that benchmarks are a set of standard metrics that the federal government uses to understand the overall effectiveness of home visiting programs, to understand, like, are the programs working, and also to make any technical adjustments at the federal level necessary. And the 19 benchmarks, which you see on this next slide, these are the 19 key constructs. Some of you already know them very well. These are things that have been researched for a while, and they're key process indicators and systems outcomes that the government has studied for long periods of time. So data should be regularly entered into ECIS. And as you know, I mean, we heard that data entry is a difficult challenge for most of you, so we're definitely going to be mindful of that and see if there's other technical assistance that we can provide there. But data should be regularly entered into ECIS, and then the OEC does a thorough review in August and September and reports back to the federal government in October. Deidre has this question on the previous slide, so let me go back there. On the budget and financial reporting slide, the December 31st outcomes payment report for April 1 through June 30th period. So I believe this is in regards to in regards to rate cards in particular, where there might be a slight delay because it's for that period. Yeah, I think it's rate cards in particular. I'm not sure if anyone else can give a better answer than that. Where it's not just like your programmatic spending, but I think it's rate card related in particular. Sorry if I butchered that response, but does the program liaison or anyone else have a better response to that?
Hi, Deidre. I think we'll do the same with regard to on the offline, going through all of the details, but this will be in the contract. In the contracts, I'm sorry, because I was not on the contracts training. That was this week. I had a prior engagement. And so in that one, the slides that were given there was more detail in terms of what the expectations were from there. But the rate card reported, this is the distinction. Reporting for rate card will be quarterly. However, payments will be biannually. So maybe that's the distinction that you guys are looking for now that I see the that question coming from Tracy.
So
yeah, Ashley was there with that. Go ahead.
This is me. I was confused by the dates of that. April 1 to June 30. That seems like that's the previous grant period. But am I misseeing that?
April 1.
Yeah, rate card started July 1st.
July 1st.
Right.
We can check these dates.
Yeah, those
we can
dates might just be off. Don't worry about that date. I think we want to go with the date that's in your contract.
Okay.
And so let's disregard this one. And that's why I refer back to the contracts training that was a couple of days ago. But the reporting for outcomes is on a quarterly basis, will be. However, the payments will be biannually. So you'll get every 6 months a payment for those outcomes.
Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
Yeah, thank you for asking that question, Deidre, and I apologize if this slide creates confusion. So we'll definitely double check the dates, and then before we send the slides out, we'll make the correction so that we do not have any confusion. And to Jen's point, definitely defer to whatever is in the formal contract there. But again, my apologies for that. All right. So let me move back to, there's one last element of compliance that I just wanted to quickly highlight, which is site visits. And site visits are really this opportunity for program liaisons in particular to do a deeper dive into results-based accountability with you and take just an overall look at how things are going with your programs and services. Now, for those of you who have been previous contractors, you know that in the pre-pandemic year, site visits looked very different, and in this past year, we had to move to virtual site visits, which are a different format. And we don't quite know what the format will be yet this year, so we will just ask for your patience as we figure out how things are going to work, and we will definitely communicate what the format and requirements will be of the site visits this coming cycle. And that said, site visits typically are conducted in November and December, and we'll try to, if there are any changes to that schedule as well, we will definitely let you know, but just to give everyone the heads up. So those were the different elements of compliance management. So we talked about budgeting and reporting, programmatic requirements, site visits, as well as benchmarks. And what time period will these site visits cover? This current contract begins 7/1. We will get back to you on that as well, Karina. So again, sorry for still working things out in light of all the changes with ongoing health situation, but we're working those things out as well. And so, yes, those are the major elements of compliance. And before we kind of put a bow onto this session, or this part of the section, this section of the session, I just wanted to end with a quick content check. And so, Colin, if you wouldn't mind launching the second poll. Say you are your organization, say you're, with your organization, and your organization's grants and contract coordinator was recently accepted into graduate school. Great for them. But as your organization works to find a replacement and redistribute the coordinator's responsibilities, you've realized that the quarterly report for your home visiting contract is due next week, and you're not sure how to complete a section of the report. What should you do? Should you accept that you won't meet the deadline and aim to get it in afterwards? Should you complete what you can of the report and send it in on the deadline? Or should you contact your program liaison to request assistance? I'm seeing the responses come in very quickly. Lots of C's. Okay, we're going to give it another 10 seconds. All right, definitely continue to put in your responses if you need a little bit more processing time. But yes, we are going to go with the majority opinion here. I think the recommended path that OEC would give you from the recommended path that OEC will give you from this scenario is that you should definitely contact your program liaison to request assistance and just let them know what's going on, and they will work it out with you and figure out either what assistance they can provide or anything else like that. So that is the content check for this question, and it seems like most of you got it right. And if you answered another way, that's okay too. And maybe it was a slip of the hand, or if you had a different opinion, that's totally okay too. But the recommended course of action is to contact your program liaison to request assistance. So that takes us to the end of this section within our session. The next part of our session is going to be about performance management. which is a newer element of active contract management. And I think we're about at 9:50 right now, so I think this might actually be a good stopping point or resting point before we get to the next part of our presentation. So I'm gonna make an executive call and say that we will take a quick 5-minute break here, and then we'll come back at 9:56 to talk through the next part of our presentation. So come back at 9:56. I'll put that in the chat. Okay, it's 9:56. I'm going to give it another 30-second question so that people can come back, because we're going to start our section on performance management, which is kind of different but closely related to compliance management. And we're going to start it off with a little activity. So that's why I want to be sure we have as many people on the line as possible before we move to the activity itself. All right, so let me go ahead and start our content again. And like I was saying, you saw that earlier Venn diagram of active contract management. There's compliance and there's performance. And performance is really about trying to push the boundaries of what's possible to continue to serve our families in the state and really make sure that our services are kind of just getting the most out, like that families can get the most out of the programs to the extent possible. And so in order to kind of get us in the thinking of performance management, I wanted to start with this quick little activity that we call accountability. Oh, sorry, the slide didn't change. We call it accountability. And this is another scenario-based activity that we're going to do on the call today. But imagine that you're a program director for Empowered Family Services. This is a fictional agency. I made it up. And you oversee home visiting services in Region 7, which is also a fictional region that I made up. And the towns in Region 7 include the 3 towns of New Edinburgh, East Edinburgh, and West Edinburgh, also fictional places. And it is now time for you to submit a quarterly report to your program liaison. And the quarterly report in this fictional example requires you to submit figures for the percent of enrolled children who successfully completed an on-time well-child visit in your region. And so on the next slide, you're going to be shown some preliminary information that the data coordinator and clinical supervisor compiled for you. I'll just, I know ECS is the percentages, but this is a fictional example, so it's just for exercise's sake. But let's say that you needed to calculate this in percent of children who enrolled who successfully completed an online well-child visit, because you're looking across your region and not just at a single kind of site thing. And so this is the information that they compiled for you. I'll just flash it very quickly, but you'll get a chance to look at it again as I go through the instructions. So you see, this is the report that they fill out for you, and there's different columns that represent the different towns, and you need the overall regional kind of percentage. And so on this, you're given that slide, and so on the next screen, I'm going to give you, once I flip back to the next screen, I'm going to give you 45 seconds to calculate the overall regional average, which includes all the towns there. So basically what you're going to have to do is add up the number of children who completed well-child visits, and then add up the number of children who enrolled in home visiting, and then divide to get the regional percentage, right? So I'll give you 45 seconds to do that. And your 45 seconds, unless anyone has questions about the purpose of, or not the purpose, but how to do the exercise, the instructions. Okay, no questions. I'm going to flip it to the next screen, and then I'm going to count 45 seconds for you to do the exercise. Not the percentage, because that would give you the regional average, but you want the overall percentage for the region. Okay, so your 45 seconds is going to start now. Oh, don't put your answer, please. Don't put your answer. Just hold on to that thought for now. But thank you, Margaret. No worries. Okay, so this is actually where 45, that was my bad, I should have said, but 45 seconds has just ended. So what is the regional percent that you should report to your program liaison? So type your answer in the chat. Margaret, you already did that. That's totally fine. Don't hit send yet, but on the count of 3, we will hit send. So on the count of 3, we should see this flurry of responses come in. And to Lisa's point earlier, I didn't want anyone to feel concerned if they didn't have the right answer. So if we just see all the responses coming in at the same time, no one will feel called out if they got a different response. But okay, so go ahead and type your answer in the chat, but don't hit send until I say so. So type your answer and then 1, 2, 3. Now hit send. Okay, I'm seeing the responses come in. Okay, I'm going to give it another 5 seconds for responses to come in. Okay, so definitely, again, if you feel like you want to continue putting in your responses, do so. But most of you got it. It's 50%. So if you had added up the first row going this way, you would have seen that there were 250 children across the region who completed their well child visits on time. And then there were 500 overall children enrolled in the program. So the correct response was 250 divided by 50. 250 divided by 500 for a total of 50% who completed their overall well child visits. And so now I just wanted to ask the group, don't put anything in the chat yet. What did you notice about the percentage for the different towns, for the completion rate for the different towns, and what's causing it? So let's take that first question first. Just by a show of hands using the Teams function, if you can raise your hand, did you notice what the difference between the different towns, the percentage difference between the different towns? And just use the raise your hand function in Teams. Okay, Susan noticed it, great. Okay, cool. I am not seeing as many hands raised because it may be that many of us were just concentrated on figuring out what the percentage was. And so now the second part of that question, by a show of hands, can folks tell me what was causing the difference in percentages? Again, using the Teams raise hand functions. Okay, Margaret saw that. So far, one hand. Okay, again, maybe it was that we were so fixed, oh, Susan as well. So maybe for most of us, we were really fixated on just figuring out what the number is that we needed to report on, that we didn't actually, we might have missed some important detail. So Deborah, yes, I'm gonna re-show the slide now. And if you looked closely at the slide, you would have noticed, or maybe before, Margaret had more sleep, yeah. Maybe before I get to the slide, well, I'll just go ahead and show the slide now. But if you had looked carefully at the slide, you would have noticed that there are notes from the field that were included with the report, and that the notes from the field stated that in the town of East Edinburgh, which had the highest percentage, as you can see, there's a difference here, like between the 3 towns, that New Edinburgh had 10% who received their well child visit on time, West Edinburgh 75%, and East Edinburgh 80%. So there's a pretty big discrepancy between the 3 towns. And if you read the note, you would have noticed that East Edinburgh had 2 new visitors in the last month, and that increased their capacity for caseload and for just their capacity to remind caregivers of well child visits. And that in East Edinburgh, the sole federally qualified health center, as you can see in the last line on the slide there, closed down this past month. So only private practices and hospital clinics remained as sites where caregivers could receive well child visits. And so most of us missed that important detail. And, you know, to be fair to everyone, this was a very contrived exercise that was kind of meant to divert your attention to make the point, actually, that a lot of times when we're just focusing on compliance reporting, sometimes we miss these really crucial details, or we're just so fixated on getting the number right so that we can report it out, that we may miss the kind of really important qualitative stories that are going on, and just understanding the social conditions or environmental conditions that might be affecting the service delivery in our area. There may very well be times when we're not seeing great numbers in terms of completion rates or something like that in a region or a town or whatnot, because there needs to be a change in service delivery. And the other times it may be something completely environmental that are, barriers that we don't have the immediate capacity to respond to, but there are ways that maybe we can strategize and think about. Is there a referral system we can put in place? Is there some kind of concrete support around transportation that we can help with? Things like, just help people become more aware. Things like that can really be critical to helping families meet critical outcomes that we might miss if we're just focusing on reporting out things alone. So that's kind of the point I wanted to make around there's kind of this spectrum here in contract management where there's just reporting out, like you see on the left-hand side of the screen, and then you get to managing performance. So reporting out is really kind of lighter touch, lower resources. Not to say that it's low resource to complete a report. I know it's very often a very time-intensive activity for most people to complete reports, but in general, it's kind of a less frequent activity that you engage in, versus managing performance is really about constant engagement, constant kind of this continual improvement mindset, right? And so active contract management helps us move further along the spectrum. For on the far left-hand side, reporting out is basically just kind of, not just kind of, but it's more about informing partners of maybe your strategic framework and hoping that people kind of try to align their activities to that framework. But as you get further down the spectrum, active contract management is really about intensive collaboration with partners at regular meetings to review trends and insights from data and take action based on the data that you're seeing. So that's kind of what we're hoping to achieve through this new version of active contract management and adding this performance management element of things. And again, I know this can still feel a little abstract, like how do we actually get to managing performance rather than just reporting out on things, right? And so I wanted to break that down by showing you all the three major components of performance management. So in order to get a structure of performance management in place, there's really a meeting structure that you need, and we've already kind of decided on it based on the slide I showed you way earlier in the presentation around having your monthly meetings with your program liaison, and then having that every other month meeting where we bring together providers from across the region to discuss a topic. And so that's kind of decided on, but again, if we need to make changes to that cadence, we can certainly hear from you all and determine it together. And then the two major elements that help guide performance management is having a thematic map. And a thematic map is basically a list of issues and focus areas aligned to our service mission that guides the direction of the different meeting agendas. So I'm going to show you an example of a thematic map in just a second, but again, want to make that map as co-designed as possible. And then the last thing that is really critical for performance management is just having a key set of metrics or regular metrics that you regularly revisit to analyze the system's health and impact on families. And so on the next slide, you can see this is an example of what a thematic map and some metrics might look like. So maybe as a group or as a group of providers in your region, for your first meeting, you want to convene and you want to talk about prenatal enrollments. And in order to understand in greater depths what's going on with prenatal enrollment in your region, you look at the number of prenatal enrollments. You might look at the percent of successful prenatal enrollments versus the number of people who decide to decline services who made contact with your program prenatally. You might also look at the percentage of people or clients in your program that are enrolled prenatally versus the percentage of people in your program who enrolled perinatally or postnatally, and trying to see if you can further move the system upstream, with of course without denying services to anyone who really needs or qualifies and wants it. And so that might be one focus of a meeting. And then the next meeting, you might talk about designing a more cohesive referral system. And that might look like disaggregating between the different referral sources you have and seeing like, where are we getting the most referrals from? What's effective about it? Or is there someone who's really maybe good at getting referrals from a different community-based organization or mental health organizations, and how do they form their partnerships with those type of organizations? So different things like that can be topics that you go on and discuss as a region through active contract management, performance management meetings. And I just wanted to note, like, definitely can use ECIS data as part of these kind of deep dives into metrics. Can also use rate card data. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, can use whatever data that we already have and just look at them in more meaningful ways. And then the last thing I just wanted to note is that when we are looking at metrics in these meetings, we're never going to assume that little asterisk at the bottom of the slide, we don't want to assume that lower rates of a metric are correlated to families' inherent characteristics. We're going to start with the premise that families are experiencing barriers, and that if we see a lower level of enrollment or something, it's our duty to remove those barriers to the best of our abilities as providers to these families. So that is an example of thematic metrics and a thematic map and metrics. And again, would love to hear your thoughts later in our session around what topics that you would be interested in looking at through data. And so on the next slide, so that was kind of the walkthrough of the performance management side of things. And in the next part of our session, we're going to do a quick simulation of what we hope a performance management meeting will look like. So before we start with the simulation, does anyone have any questions related to like data deep dives or performance more generally? I'll give it another 5 seconds for questions. And I know I'm saying a lot, and so you might need some processing time. All right, so let's move on into our simulation for today. And this is another activity that we wanted to do with you, and we're calling it Choose Your Own Data Adventure. So some of you may be familiar with Choose Your Own Adventure types of books. I really loved them growing up as a kid, and maybe there's a child in your life or just someone you know who also loves Choose Your Own Adventure books. But if you're not familiar with the format, basically a Choose Your Own Adventure book is one where the audience is basically a character in the book as well. And so you'll go through the book and there are these different plot lines, and at certain different points in the plot line, you as the audience or the reader get to choose, do I want to pursue plot line A, or do I want to pursue plot line B or plot line C? And depending on what your choice is, you can end up in a very different part of the story. So because we have quite a large group in our orientation today, and it would make it kind of hard for us to do big breakout groups, we're going to do this instead and have you all collectively in our audience be the reader or the navigator for today. And we're going to use the polling function for you to choose the adventure today. So with that said, in order to get us to do this activity, I created another fictional scenario. And in this scenario, your mission, should you choose to accept it, is that you are a program manager and your name is Bear. And your organization has provided home visiting services for over a decade, but this is actually your first time working with the OEC. And so you're this very active and curious learner, and you've been asked to sit in on a performance management meeting. And and as part of your participation, we request that you ask questions that help us identify the root challenge of service discrepancies that we're observing, and also help us identify any potential next steps. So that is the overall setup of the scenario. And then in order to kind of play this whole scenario out to its final conclusion, we also have a number of people who are supporting us today as additional cast members. So our two lovely liaisons, Luz and Jen, are going to play the roles of provider A and provider B, And my colleague Colin is going to play the role of provider C. And just for the sake of this exercise, I'm going to play the role of the liaison. But when you have your performance management meetings, you will have far, far, far more competent liaisons who actually know way more about home visiting than I do lead your discussions. So that is the setup for today, or that's the cast of characters that we have today. And then say we start this meeting, and in particular, the meeting is going to be focused on prenatal visiting dosage. That is our topic for today. So in our research, thank you. So in our research, we found that there's this 2013 study that found that prenatal mothers who received at least 8 or more visits by the time they reached 26 weeks of pregnancy were less likely to experience preterm births compared to expecting mothers who received 3 or fewer visits, right? So that's kind of this research base that we have out there. So our objective going into our performance management meeting with our different providers is first to just see how many of our current clients who enrolled prenatally up to 18 weeks, because they would be able to hit that 8 visit mark, reached 8 visits by the time of their 26th week of pregnancy. So that's our first objective. And then our second objective for this meeting is to figure out, are there changes we can make to ensure that more families get the optimal support or dosage during pregnancy? So that is our scenario. And so in order to dive deeper into this topic, I started to look at some data, which is all fictional data. I made it up for the scenario, but I started to look at some data and I broke it out. And I want to share with you all this slide on this next screen. So I broke out the number of prenatal clients by number of visit and by provider. So let me go ahead and just explain what's happening on this slide right now. So each of these lines represents a different provider. So provider C is this lighter blue line that you see on top. And these different points represent a different visiting threshold. So the way to read this is that provider C enrolled a total of 32 clients prenatally. And of those 32 clients, 30 made it to their second or third home visit, and then 27 made it to their 8th home visit. So they made it to 8 or more home visits. Similarly, just to take another example, provider A, as you can see on this legend, is the second line here. And they had 30 clients who enrolled prenatally, and 21 of their clients made it to the second or third visit, and then 16 clients made it to their 8th visit. So there's some drop off happening. So overall, across the board, I think you're seeing that across our 3 providers, there's some discrepancy between the number of enrollments that we have and the number of clients who actually reached their 8th visit. So I'm wondering what's going on here. But I think this slide alone doesn't really give us enough information to start forming a hypothesis on what's going on. So I went ahead and cut the data again into more granular parts. So in this next slide, let's take a look if there are any other patterns that we're observing about the drop-off that's happening. And so in this next slide, I changed it a little bit. I showed, instead of just the raw number of clients at each visiting threshold, I shared the percentage of clients who made it to that threshold instead, just because everyone was starting off with a different number of clients, and I just wanted to standardize how we analyze things a little bit. And I also broke it up further and showed not just the first visit or second, third visit threshold or 8th visit threshold, but also included data points around how many people made it to their 4th or 5th visit and how many people made it to their 6th or 7th visit. So again, just to explain what's going on in the slide, take provider B, this hot purple line here. Provider B had 100% of their prenatal clients make it to their 4th or 5th visit. And then they saw a drop off where only 92% of their clients made it to the 6th or 7th visit, and then it stabilized again. So again, across the board, we're seeing that while provider B and C are doing a pretty good job reaching the 4th or 5th visit, across the board, all the providers are seeing a big drop off as soon as people hit their 6th or 7th visit. So something is going on there. And then with provider A in particular, we're noticing a different pattern, well, a similar pattern here, but a large drop off just even after that first visit, and then some more drop off afterwards. So I wonder what's going on here, right? What could be going on that's causing this drop off and preventing people from making it to their 8th visit? So this kind of scene is where I need Bear's help. If you were Bear, which question would you want to ask after you saw these data? So Colin, if you wouldn't mind launching the poll again, and I can definitely flip back to the slide if people want to see the graphs again. But if you were Bear, which question would you want to ask after you saw these data? There's no right or wrong answer here. This is just based on what you're curious about and where you want to follow in terms of a plot line. So go ahead and just pick one of the storylines and we can follow that. Okay, see your responses coming in. See interest in provider A. I'll give it another 10 seconds and then we'll see which storyline has the most votes and then we will pursue that storyline. At the moment, it looks like A is the front runner, but another 5 seconds to vote. Okay, I'm seeing A get a lot of votes in, so we're gonna pursue plotline A and see, we're gonna ask to the group, what might be preventing the families served by provider A from completing more visits? And so for this next part of our exercise, I'm actually gonna have to stop doing full screen, or actually no, I'll keep it at full screen. So the question that that Bear has decided to ask to the providers in the room and the liaison in the room is, what might be preventing the families served by provider A from completing more visits? So let's hear from provider A. 1 second. Okay. All right, take it away, Liz.
Wow, so pleased to see this data. I have many questions. I'd love to delve deep into the story behind this data, but we want to keep track of the non-teenage parents in our programs as well. I would love to hear from provider B and C.
Oh, sorry, loses the slide on the screen.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was reading my, so sorry. Honestly, it's disheartening to see how our low numbers, really the decline from 30% to 16 really shows some areas that we need to pay attention and really work hard to support families, especially because so many of our families are on the younger side. I didn't realize we were losing so many families even before their baby is born. I'm sorry about the confusion.
Okay. No, I understand what you were saying, Liz, and I know it can feel really discouraging and that home visitors that you're working with are really doing their very best. So let's try to take this as a learning moment instead. And we know that each family is different and there could be different things going on with the families that you're working with. So just now you mentioned that you're working with a lot of young families. So why don't we try cutting the data by the age of expecting caregivers instead? All right, so let's go ahead. Oh, thank you. So let's go ahead. Thankfully, I've already cut the data in this way. And I have this next slide, which I want to show you. And so now I'm showing you the age of your clients by each provider. So each pair of bars represents a different provider. And the number here for this first bar, this kind of magenta-y color, represents the number of clients that you're serving who are under the age of 20. So those are your teenage clients. And then this kind of hot purple color represents the number of clients that each of you have that are over the age of 20. So clearly from this graph here, we're already seeing that provider A, you serve a larger number of clients who are teenage as compared to provider B and C. So I wonder, teenagers, they're going through different things in their lives. it can be different from how someone who is over the age of 20 or, you know, in their mid-20s or 30s or what have you, experience pregnancies. So I wonder if there's something around that that may speak to why we're seeing this difference between yourself and the other providers in your regions. And so I was interested, since we saw this data, and I think it's really interesting to kind of pursue how this kind of plays out, I also cut the data in the second way. And I show you the number of the number of visits, but instead of showing you all the clients in your agency, I'm just showing you the number of clients under 20 years old. And now we're seeing a pretty different pattern, right? We're seeing that before you had a very large drop off and kind of saw like a negative slope going way down. But here, when you look at just your clients who are under age 20, we're not seeing quite as dramatic a drop off. You're actually, you know, you had 20 of your clients make it to their first visit, and then you had a pretty stable number of clients make it through their second and all the way to their 6th or 7th visit, and then a little bit more drop off at the 8th visit. But overall, you're doing a pretty good job retaining your teenage clients. Provider B and C, you had less teenage clients to start, and you had a pretty good stability from the first to 4th and 5th visit, and then again you saw this drop off happening here. But there's some differences going on here. So while overall your numbers seem low, earlier provider A, when we cut it this way and we disaggregate by different types of populations, we are seeing a difference in how you are able to serve your clients. So just to flip it to the next slide, again, I showed this by percentage, and again, this is just by your clients who are under the age of 20. So again, provider A, you have this, again, you're kind of at a pretty stable kind of almost flat line compared to provider B and C, where you see this pretty significant drop. But of course, we see the significant drop for providers B and C because there's a smaller denominator in terms of the number of clients that you're serving under 20. So any kind of changes in that can make things look a little bit more dramatic. But again, overall, provider A, I think you're actually doing a really good job keeping your clients who are teenaged and helping them get to this final point here. So I know it was disheartening to see what the original numbers looked like when we grouped everyone together, but I think you're doing a really good job when it comes to reaching teenage clients. And so I would love to throw it back to the rest of our providers for a quick discussion. So Jen, do you want to share your thoughts?
It's only been a year trying to get off mute in a timely manner. So, Luz, your retention with teen parents is actually amazing. Can you share what you're doing?
Oh, wow. I'm happy to see this data, though I want to make sure we keep our non-teen parents at the heart of our programs as well. I love to hear from others. And so learning from you both will really help us. And so wondering about what actually encourage starting with community-based visits may help engage parents, and maybe in a neutral spot like an ice cream shop or a school, not a school, but a library or even a park. This can help build rapport with our teen parents.
Yeah, wow. I think I'm going to take this back to my staff as well and see if it makes sense for us to move in this direction with our teams. We'll definitely report back at the next meeting.
And see, so that was one plot line where if you follow, you start with one set of data, you kind of drill down further, and it reveals a different story. And in this case, although originally it seemed like provider A maybe wasn't doing quite as well as the rest of the providers, but actually provider A had a different kind of clientele base, and that really kind of shaped our understanding of the different numbers that we were seeing. And then it also revealed to us that, as stated in the RFP, teen parents are a priority population for the OEC, and provider A was able to share this practice that they have around starting with community-based visits instead of going directly into the home immediately, just to help the teens get a sense that they're still out there, they're still in the community, and feeling like whole people. So that's the type of simulation or kind of conversation that we have hoped to pair data and get down to practice through active contract management conversations. So I think we still have a little bit of time, so we can actually do a second or even a third scenario if people are interested. So maybe if I can get a few thumbs up if you want to see a different scenario for either plot line B or C as well, we can do that. So definitely, okay. I'm seeing some hands go up. If we have maybe like 2 or 3 more thumbs up or hands up, I can definitely share a different scenario. Okay, I'm seeing hands go up. So because B got or actually we had C get the second most number of votes earlier. So we'll do C first, and if there's time, we can also do scenario B. So let me flip it back to this. So C was, do we have data on who is exiting the program before their 8th visit and why? Let me stop the full screen so I can skip to that slide very quickly. I think it's this one. Okay, so this was B. So this is from current slide. So choice C was, what are the reasons, do we have additional data on why people are exiting? And actually, I was able to pull some things out of ECS, again, fictional data. And in this scenario, I found that the greatest reason for people leaving the program and not making it all the way to the 8th visit is because home visitors weren't able to locate their caregivers. That was by far the largest reason why people weren't making it to their 8th visit. And then we also saw some reasons around time constraints, and we also saw that one family moved, and so they were no longer a part of the program and graduated from it. But by far, unable to locate caregiver is the largest reason for people not making it to their 8th visit. And that puts us in a tricky situation, right? Because I recognize that there's only so much that we can do if the communication line goes silent, and if we can't reach out, like if people aren't responding, there's no way that we can schedule the next visit and all that and make sure that they get the right support and dosage. But I do wonder if there's anything we can do to revive or prevent the communication line from going silent in the first place. So providers in our call today, I'm wondering, what are your outreach protocols?
Well, our standard practice is to call, then text, and mail the client a letter weekly for 4 weeks after the last contact.
Yeah, that's the same for us, Jen.
Go ahead, Liz, I think it's your line next.
I'm sorry, I'm really struggling today. And so I don't know if this is asking too much, but last year we had a home visitor who was 4 weeks out from the last contact with the family that she really connected and engaged with. It was around the winter time, so she decided to send a handwritten note to engage the family. And about a week later, she connected with the family, and they decided to develop a plan and are going to be meeting semi-monthly visits ever since. Maybe there's something about that old kind of personal touch in handwriting a note.
Wow, it's a really interesting idea, Luz. I think the time and cost of a handwritten card, that's pretty low. I think we can definitely try that approach instead of our template letters that we're using now.
And C, and so that's the second plot line where, it's still difficult to kind of understand what exactly is going on. The data takes us so far in understanding that the main reason that the clients in this scenario weren't making it to their 8th visit is because we just couldn't get in contact with them. But at the very least, through this conversation, we were able to brainstorm as a group different practices that we might want to try in reviving that communication line with them. And while, as noted in this scenario, like some people have letter templates and stuff like that, but moving to that personalized touch in this scenario was able to get that communication line going up again. And so this is a practice that one might try across the region and see if that makes a difference in decreasing the number of clients who exit the programs prematurely. So that is scenario for scenario C. And we have time, so I'm going to go ahead and take us through scenario B as well, if folks don't mind. Again, let me skip to that slide real quick. Sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit. I think, where does it say? Okay, so B was, the scenario in B was, what does the group think about the drop-off after the 4th or 5th visit? So providers, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on why we're seeing this drop-off after the 4th or 5th visit.
Yeah, it's a good question, Anne. I mean, at the 4th or 5th visit, we're at about 1 to 2 months into the program. So maybe clients feel like they've gotten everything they need at that point and don't see a need to continue.
I think that's certainly a possibility. And I think the question then becomes, so if they feel that they don't need anything further from this program, how do we ensure that we continue to demonstrate the value of home visiting to our prenatal clients? So I'm wondering if you all can share more about the different things you talk about with your clients during home visits.
From our model curriculum, there are 4 areas that we focus on and we talk about: self-care, parenting, life courses, and supportive referrals network.
Yeah, it's the same for us, Luz. We aren't too prescriptive about when to have what conversations with clients, but we have a ton of supporting material home visitors can reference under each content area.
Yeah, I think I just had a thought. I don't know about the rest of you, but I know for our home visitors, we're spending most of our visits talking about parenting and referral networks because we're trying to support people on their parenting journey. But maybe we should be spending more time on self-care topics with clients instead.
That makes total sense, to focus more on self-care, especially while they await the birth of their child. By talking to the caregivers about parenting and referrals just may seem a little bit too abstract at that time.
Yeah, I can see how talking about the pros and cons of formula, while important, could feel too distant or someone who just not along, right? So when your primary concern is just how are you going to get around when your back aches so much, or that you're feeling lonely because your friends have stopped inviting you to hang out with them, then.
Yeah, this is really interesting. And I wonder if you could actually use some of your continuous quality improvement causal analysis tools to further explore this with your home visitors. And then I think we can see if adjusting the home visiting contact for expecting families as compared to other families to be focused on self-care after you've talked through the major pregnancy topics makes a difference in retaining your clients.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'd love to hear more about what provider and A and B are learning as well.
And seen. And so again, in this, in this scenario, we use the data to kind of figure out, so once we're at the 4th or 5th visit, where are we in the programming curriculum, and is it appropriate to make adjustments to the curriculum just so that we can be sure that we're really meeting our client needs, especially if they are prenatal, and how can we adjust our practices within the confines of our model requirements to really make sure that we are demonstrating the value of home visiting and making this a program and service that works for them. And so again, these are the types of conversations that we hope that you will have in active contract management. And so you've now seen how digging deeper into data alongside your peers in these really candid conversations can help generate ideas and practices to support families. And these were, highly fictionalized, highly simplified stylized examples, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the attitude that we'll hope you'll bring to our active contract management performance meetings, and kind of the mindset as we move towards an approach that really is focused on using data to draw your knowledge and really making things better across our systems and regions. So I hope that gives you a little bit preview of what we are trying to achieve here. And I know maybe it still feels a little abstract. Some of our pilot providers can probably share a little bit more of their experiences, or if they would like to, but this is what we're trying to achieve here. And so with that, just want to pause first to see if there are any questions about this meeting format and how it's being structured and the types of topics or anything like that. Okay, I'll give it another 5 seconds. Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed the scenarios. I hope, yes, I hope this brought things to life for you. Should we anticipate evaluation of the AECM process? Tracy, do you mind saying more about, do you mean like evaluation of whether the process itself is working, or using AECM as an evaluation process? And if you, yeah, go ahead.
I was thinking the latter, that since this process is evolving and changing a little bit from how we've been doing it previously, is there going to be some type of evaluation of that?
Oh, so evaluation of the process itself. Yeah, as I was saying, I think there is going to be a continuous feedback loop between yourselves and your program liaisons, where you can share, like, is this working for you or is it not? And we can definitely have formal check-in points there too as well. So we can do that. We haven't built out what the evaluation of the process itself will look for, but I think in the spirit of continuous quality improvement, there's no reason why we can't CQI our own processes, right? So we will definitely be thinking about that as we continue to build this out, and we will want to hear your feedback if you have thoughts too. And Lisa asked, so are these scenarios an example of a monthly conversation between the liaisons and supervisors? If so, will it trickle down to the home visitors? So the scenarios I gave were intended to be an example of the meetings that happen every other month between the program liaison and the supervisors or directors, whomever, across a region from multiple programs coming together. I think if it's appropriate, we can probably invite home visitors to some of these meetings as well, especially if there's a topic that will have a lot of purview to, and it will be very valuable to have their insight on and help us understand what's going on beneath any of the data that we might show for any of these home visits. So I think generally it's still an open question around like who exactly is going to be in each of the meetings and at a like organizational representative level. But I think we can be flexible with it and just figure out there's probably needs to be someone who's consistent from your organization as a representative at these meetings. But if more voices make sense, then we can definitely include more voices. Okay, any other questions? Okay, so the next thing that I want to just take a couple minutes to do is just get your thoughts on what topics you'd be interested in exploring and doing a deep dive, and if you had any thoughts on metrics that we should be using for these different topics. So I have some examples here around prenatal enrollments, reducing racial disparities, reaching Indigenous families, etc. So if you have any thoughts, you can definitely unmute yourself and share now, or just go ahead and put anything in the chat. And I'm also going to send out a survey after this because I don't want to put anyone on the spot and I want to give you time to process. So you can send in additional topic ideas through the survey as well. And then Virginia asked a question that Ashley already answered around how will data be gathered to begin conversations. But yes, the majority of the data will be through ECIS. And just in terms of process, we will almost always inform you of what the topic will be beforehand so that you know coming in. And then to the extent possible, we'll share like key material out beforehand as well. Yeah, and quarterly reports. To the extent possible, we want to leverage the existing data sources that we have. But I do think like if there's ever a time where we get to a point in our active contract management conversations where we think there's a certain data point that's really valuable that's not being generated anywhere, like a survey or something like that, then maybe we can have conversations around, as a region or as a state, how would we go about doing that in a way that is like feasible, permissible, and actually gives value to the work that we're doing, etc. So I think those are open conversations that can be had too. Cool. So yeah, any thoughts on potential topics? Okay, I'd like to begin first, get our contract. Totally understand that. We want to get the foundations in place before we can do a lot of these deep dives. So I think the cadence is that we're probably not going to start the deep dives just yet, just so that you have time to get everything in place. But we are hoping to move to this structure soon enough. I do hope that you saw kind of the value of the potential meetings of the meeting structure that we're proposing to. Curious to know some of the state level numbers and percentages. Yeah, that's another thing that people have asked about in the past around, like, it's really great for us to be able to meet as regions, but we're also curious about what does it look like across regions, and is there potential learnings that could happen across the state? And so I think to the extent possible, we want to benchmark ourselves across state and across regions too. Also see where we were with these issues and others from our last statewide task force. Strategies to recruit parents to participate in advisory boards. I like that idea. Cool. I'll give it another 30 seconds to see if people have any potential topics. And if not, again, you can definitely send your thoughts through a survey. And after this, we will just do a quick recap and next steps for us. Okay, I'm seeing the chat stabilize, so I'm going to move us to our recap and next steps, and we can actually end a little early today. So just in terms of a recap, I'm just going to verbally talk through it. Perhaps it would be good for OEC to ask us what has been our experience. Yes, definitely. So the point of this topic of these meetings is to draw your experiences, and there will be prep work going into the meetings to get your experiences as well. But it's also, to the point I was trying to make earlier, like, we're trying to create the space where we can share those topics, not just with the OEC, but with other providers in your region. Right. So in terms of a recap, we talked through today what active contract management is, and there's all those elements of compliance management, but eventually we want to get to the stage where we can get to performance management and continue to push the frontiers of possibility for our system, and really understanding and getting the full value of home visiting for families in Connecticut. And so that's kind of the major point that we were trying to make through the meeting today, through our session today. And in order to do that through active contract management, we want to create these spaces for you to convene as providers and really share your practices across the board, guided by data, but also guided by the lived experiences of families that you're working with and the on-the-ground knowledge of your home visitors, site coordinators, etc. And so that's kind of the main takeaway that I hope you all get. out of this in terms of what the value of active contract management can do, and that we're going to try to look forward to creating these structures with you all. It's most likely going to be bumpy processes as we figure out how everything fits together and works, but this is the vision that we're moving towards, and I hope it brings a lot of value for you all as well. And just in terms of next steps, I'm going to send out the survey, as I mentioned, where you can share topics or metrics that you would be interested in looking at. And then the lines of communication are always open. So if you have any thoughts or questions related to active contract management, feel free to send them to your program liaison and we can discuss them as a group. And then in terms of very concrete next steps, I will make sure that I go back and look at the dates to be sure that everything on the slides are correct. And then we will send out these slides so that people can have them. Send out the slides so that people can have them. And there will be the complete slides so you can see the scenarios as well. All right, so that is it in terms of our orientation session today. I will stay on the line a little longer if people have questions and just are thinking and want to put them in the chat or voice them out loud. But otherwise, you're free to move on to whatever is next in your day. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anne.
So I see a hand come up from Sonia.
Great job. And you want to say you did a great